establish today, instead of me asking them questions, I'm going to start with you guys asking Nicholas and others questions, and then I'm going to have my own questions.
All right, any questions?
Any questions?
Reflections? Introduce yourself.
I'm Candy Okoboy from Uganda. Nicholas, that was a fascinating presentation.
Thank you.
And it's the first time that I've heard African culture and technology and exponential growth being spoken about in the same sentence. For me, it's complete eye-opening, and I'm just wondering, what do you think would be East Africa's first step towards that? And when you talk about African culture and its validity in today's technology, it really rings true to our thinking, but I think we never really felt that there was that connection and it can happen. But we obviously are very cultural people, and there's a lot that we want to preserve, particularly going forward in this world of exponential. So what are the practical steps? What can we actually do tomorrow after leaving Sahara Sparks 2019?
For you personally, I gave out the challenge for each one of us to reflect on what value system you would like to see perpetuated in these exponential technologies. But also, when you sit down with your teams, if you're a corporation and you're talking about a new product or service, one of the first questions you should be asking is not how much money can we make from this? What's our market share? In addition to that, what's our impact? But I'm asking you to ask a third question. Are we doing everything we can to assert African values in that? And I, quite frankly, do not even know what that looks like. I'm cutting edge thinking even with myself, but I feel in my gut that there's something there. And I would like to hear from you all about what values you think are important and how they can be instilled in these technologies. Let's take, for example, Facebook. Facebook claims, Mark Zuckerberg claims that he's building a community, right? So that on the surface, it looks like it very much aligns with African values. But that community can have an incredibly detrimental aspect on society if it's not managed in a proper way. What would an African version of Facebook look like that enhances the community, the integrity, the respect, doesn't draw down those other elements? And I think that's a question we should be asking ourselves. As we develop products and services, if you're a government official and you're providing services, to do it in a way and exploring the use of blockchain or exploring the use of virtual reality for medical devices and the like, I think one of the questions would be, how are we instilling African values in that? What that looks like, I think, is actually a whole new paradigm of thinking. It's a new lens. We have our market researchers who have very well-defined tools for doing profit projections. We have our impact analysts, and I would put myself in that category, who figures out positive potential social impact. Well, what about now value-centered design? And how are we instilling those values in the technologies that we deploy? What are those tools? And quite frankly, I agree with you. I don't hear this much. This is why I'm sharing with you all. This is the first time I'm talking about this, and I travel around the world. First time I'm talking about this very theme. And I really think that there needs to be new tools, and this is an opportunity for people to create that tool set for designers of the kinds of questions you would want to ask, the kinds of opportunities you have to instill African values into these technologies.
Thank you very much, Nicholas. Any other question?
Come on now.
Amazing presentation. So, the challenge is, how do you disrupt when there are limits? Because growing exponentially is something good, is something interesting, but when you have regulations, obstacles, and barriers to this, barriers to that, again, being practical, how do you disrupt and being innovative and create those exponential solutions when there's a lot of don't break this, don't break that? How do you disrupt without causing chaos?
So I know we have a colleague from Deloitte in the room. Deloitte has a concept they call innovation at the edge. And that is for large corporations to allow for experimentation on the periphery of their core business model and allow that experimentation to happen in a startup type environment. So for corporations, innovation at the edge is a good philosophy. For startups and for entrepreneurs, your job is to disrupt. In fact, that's your superpower. Your superpower is you're nimble. You don't have a vested interest in something, and you can, by design, do what Buckminster Fuller calls anticipatory design.
Do what Buckminster Fuller calls anticipatory design, anticipating where technology is going, not just technology, but social trends are going, and design for that. That's the superpower of a startup. And if you're a government, I would say it's actually more challenging because you have an obligation to provide goods and services to the citizenry, and you can't screw that up. You can't toy around with healthcare when people's lives are on the line. You can't toy around with food production when people need to eat. What you can do, however, is partner with the private sector. And the private sector should be well primed to take these risks, and risk and fail according to market values. So that would be the answer I would have. I don't know, we have other people with probably good insights on that. Would either of you want to answer?
Yeah, this is what you have been talking about, the sandbox. It's the question of trying to see how you experiment on one hand, and especially if now using human-centered design and you start to anticipate what is going to happen. And this is what we need to have innovators, regulators, and policymakers working together in a sandbox to be able to see what we need to control. And that's where the ethics is. You're talking about you have shown the book of Harari. Harari is the professor of Hebrew University in Israel. If you could hear him talking, and if you are going to a mosque or to a church, you'll question whether you have whether it's proper to go there, because he's just claiming that for the humanity side, for the last many years, religion has not contributed anything. This is how we start. And these are just past stories of the people. So they are now reacting, waiting for new technologies to come in, and here you have to ask a sheikh or a priest or a rabbi to comment on something, whether this is halal or this is haram or this is correct or it's not correct, while they know nothing about this technology. So you see, this is the challenge. If we are in a country where people believe on their religion, how are you inculcate this during that development process? And that's why I'm happy to see Mheshimiwa, the judge here, and to be able to start to understand these things and what are the implications.
Thank you, Dr. Mshinda. Will that bring me a question to you and Ambassador? Okay. So, from what you just said, do you think this is actually a disruptive stress or disruptive opportunity for Africa?
I think it's a disruptive opportunity. You remember yesterday I mentioned about the result of the work of Elon Musk, which happened in Haan. Can you imagine that the children in Haan, they were taught by AI how to read and write? And it was very difficult for them to understand. So if you have 250 million in the world of children who cannot read and write, so that's an opportunity on how to be able for them to be able to read and write. But there are also some challenges which are remaining, especially if you take that particular example. How long are you going to put children in schools? And and the AI itself, because you don't actually see it. So if you are doing a research or you are working on AI, or you do we need to have somebody who will be able to understand the algorithms and to see how the algorithms actually going to work. So we need to regulate. Are the regulators TCRI? Are you expecting TCRI to understand the algorithms before they allow algorithms to work massively? So there are challenges on both sides. So this is why we need to anticipate and to see how we can take them forward.
Ambassador Ami, you being a daily student, does Nicholas's presentation make any sense for Africa at all?
Certainly. You put it right. I'm a perpetual student. And as you notice in the last 2 days that I've been interacting with you, I'm excited by these new ideas. And I'm glad that Nicholas has validated most of my views that I've been expressing in public. Now, these technologies are there and they continue to develop when there's exponential growth. And I offered the challenges in Africa that, and certainly in Tanzania here, the policy framework, the regulatory framework, even the legal framework and cultural framework that will direct the growth of these technologies that are already there and they still keep on coming. Certainly, Africa, more than Tanzania. I think my preoccupation is more on Africa. And we have several advantages first because we are backward. And therefore we are able to chart our way forward in a manner that we can avoid a lot of mistakes that have been committed by other countries or other continents. But certainly because you recall the issues that have been raising day before yesterday and yesterday, that there's a narrative that describes Africa as the richest continent in the world, and yet it is the poorest. This dichotomy and this contradiction between being rich and poor at the same time, we have to resolve. There's something wrong there. There are structural issues that we need to resolve. But also, as we resolve those structural issues, and there's an opportunity to deal with the digital technology that is coming there. First, to make the exploitation of these abundant resources that Africa has to produce much more than they can do with the current technologies. And indeed, we can do that and have the entire world at our command, because we are the last frontier, some of these resources. And sometimes you can say it's good that they were never exploited before, because we would have missed the opportunities of getting into exponential growth. Now we have that one. But also the challenge that as we leapfrog into the future, we have opportunity to consider the value issues that Nicholas has been raising, the collectiveness of the African society, the honesty that has always guided our interaction. But the communal aspect of it would be integrated in our approaches to evoke exponential growth as we exploit our resources in Africa.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I was telling Nicholas, I was driving. I can't talk about these issues without mentioning Ifakara. I was driving to Ifakara, to my farm, and it was getting dark. And I had some friends who are urban. I think one of them was from Europe. And he said the passers-by, as we were driving, he said they had no phones. And indeed, we realized they didn't have phones. But I said, well, but they're talking to each other. Yeah, precisely because they didn't have cell phones.
They were talking to each other.
Which is opposing the urban centers.
Yeah.
You have a group of people, sitting together but not talking to each other. So I'm saying some of these issues that are still remnant in the African society can be built in our approaches to digitalize and to invoke exponential growth in our societies and economies.
Dr. Mshinda, you wanted to add something?
Yes, I think what is the most important for us to understand also the entry barrier for this revolution is very, very low. As you have seen, that guy who is making drone, we are the first one in Tanzania was actually to make the first drone out of 3D printing out of electronic waste, and Rahim has made the first drone there at Costec. The entry barrier is much lower than the previous revolution. Imagine if you are in the second industrial revolution where you have to start with massive production, which is really started in US. But now, as you can see, the cost of sequencing the genome has come substantially down. The internet, it's going to be, actually yesterday we heard from the CEO of Vodacom, we have 90% of the countries connected. The network is good that Mr. Engineer Ulanga is here also. So we need to understand these opportunities which we have, and we have use the abundance of the youth in Africa. The question is, how are we going to make use of it to be able to benefit for our community development in general?
Thank you. So before I become very selfish, okay, there are two questions.
Yes, I got it for you, Vanessa. There was one that started here, the second one here, third one there, fourth, I see you, fourth one there. So let's start quickly. Short questions so they can answer. We have about 10 minutes left.
Thank you. My name is Margaret Paul, and I'm from First Home Africa. We are online landlords. We provide permission to rent to buy. Mr. Nicholas, that was a really wonderful presentation, quite insightful. So I have a question, or rather an observation that I would like your views, all of you. You gave us a very good insight on existing global challenges. So I have a concern. You have been in Africa, specifically in Tanzania. So you know how we live, you know our ways of doing things, our tradition, custom, and whatnot. So do you think we are ready to be disrupted? Do you think we are ready to disrupt? And in answering my question, I would like you to focus on the global challenge in matter of preference. Which one do you think we are ready to be disrupted on? And on shelter, that's more of my interest. Do you think, to what extent are we ready to be disrupted as far as housing is concerned? Thank you.
I think there are about 4 questions there. Do you mind if we get the questions and then we all answer them? Is that easier? Vanessa, can we get the questions and then second question?
Mine is a quick one. We always talk about how the legal framework can actually follow technological development in Africa and government and policy and so on. This problem is not unique to Africa. Technology also develops much quicker, much faster than any policy, government, or law can. So I wanted to hear from you, Nicholas, if you had any insights on how this happened in the Western world and how are the lessons that we could be used in Africa for how technological development and the government framework can adjust.
Hi, my name is Vincencia. I'm from Media Space Tanzania, where we use storytelling and media to promote Fourth Industrial Revolution. So my question is on balancing the fear vis-a-vis leveraging opportunities that the Fourth Industrial Revolution is bringing. I have a 3-year-old daughter, and she has learned languages from using, technology, watching cartoons and everything. But then how do I stop her from like getting too much of technology and internet vis-a-vis learning? Because I see fear even in Africa, in our country, for instance. You know, we are talking about vegetable burger, you know, like meat. But you ask here how many people will be ready to eat that. It will be a challenge. I'm talking from my background, from biotechnology part of it. And I know I've been struggling with the genetic engineering. You know, we have issues with, you know, a lot of challenges in agriculture, etc. It's only because of fear. But people drink Coca-Cola and people use vaccines. Yeah. They don't know it's biotechnology. Yeah. So how do we balance that? Yeah.
Fear versus opportunity. Yeah. The last question, and then they'll answer, and if we have a bit of time, where was it? Sorry, ladies.
I'm Geraldine. My question goes to Mr. Nicholas. Okay. So since we are in the fourth industrial revolution, that is digital era, we know that technology is a disruptive issue, and of course it's growing big now. Then, talking of Africa, employment is a big challenge, especially among young people, the youth. We know that. Then, if we incorporate or use technology, as you say, don't you think that some jobs will be invalid? Like you said, maybe in 10 years to come, kids will be learning online, like getting the visual education. So this thing is interesting, but a bit it's vague to me, because thinking of the job like teaching, it will be something like I don't know how to say it, but I hope you got the question exactly. What do you say about it? And the greatest fear of us Africans is that we fear that the coming future of jobs, it will be something which is very complicated.
Thank you.
Job security, those questions, Vanessa.
Yeah. Thank you. So, Nicholas, which one will start, and maybe you can chip in too.
Should we go in order of the questions?
Yeah, sure. Okay.
The first one is on challenges.
Yes, the first one. Yes, was, do you think Africa is ready to be disrupted?
Nobody's ready. Nobody's ready to be disrupted. If you think you are, then you're not ready to be disrupted. Disruption comes in unpleasant ways. By definition, disruption is something that challenges you to be something different than you are. This requires uncommon leadership. It requires uncommon partnerships to be able to be resilient and thrive in the future. I think the question was specifically trying to get at like global grand challenges and what I see as one of the top global grand challenges, and also I believe there was an issue on housing and shelter. Me personally, the challenge in my job, my role at Singularity University is I'm faculty chair of global grand challenges. What a title, right? I get to think about all the world's biggest challenges and somehow solve them? No, but I work with people who can. And I empower people with the skills and the mindsets to do so. The one challenge that I think supersedes all of them right now is climate change. Climate change is having its moment. Climate change affects, crosscuts all of the other global grand challenges, and a country like Tanzania didn't cause climate change. But climate change is going to completely wreak havoc on Tanzania's economy, in terms of agricultural systems, in terms of sea level rise, in terms of disrupting basic economic services. It will wreak havoc. And the irony here, the great social injustice of our time is climate change was not caused by the most vulnerable countries to climate change. So that doesn't mean that Tanzania can look the other way and say, climate change, that's a first world issue. And by the way, I hate the term first world, but I know people use it. So I think climate change is a key issue. The village I live in Mgunjuku in Zanzibar, their shoreline is being already wrecked by sea level rise. You can see, I've been living there for 15 years. I can see the changes that are happening. And they're not ready to withstand it. And who's going to pay for them to have a seawall? New York can build a seawall. Amsterdam can build a seawall. The village of Ngunjuku in Zanzibar, who's going to do that? And yet they didn't cause climate change. So to me, this is a great irony of our time. It's a great challenge for Tanzania, and I think this has to be dealt with at the global level to get financing in order to address it. But there again, I think we need to look towards African value systems, especially the economy now, which doesn't contribute to the big global carbon footprint. What's working in that economy? The circular economy is an inherent part of a Tanzanian economy, of a village economy. How do we translate that into the digital world? And I think a circular economy is a good example of a value system which can be translated into a digital world. Specifically on the issue of shelter, I gave you one example of a company called New Story, which is 3D printing houses. Their target is to print entire houses for less than $1,000 in less than 24 hours.
Wow.
And they're on target to do that. Another company that's in our startup ecosystem at Singularity University has a very different vision of that. They want to put a giant factory next to a large undeveloped land area and factory build houses. Just like you go down a Tesla factory line, and out the other end comes a house which then gets deployed. So changes are happening to our manufacturing sector and housing in particular to address the scale that we're going to need because population growth and housing and shelter needs are going to be so great.
Okay. The other question was the insights on how legal framework can adjust to this technological change.
Well, the observation was spot on. Digital technology grows at exponential rates. Our legal frameworks, our cultures grow at these linear rates. So there's an inherent tension there. And the United States is no place to look for examples. And there too, this is an opportunity for Tanzania, for Africa to leapfrog over these legal frameworks, anticipate them, and design legal frameworks in anticipation of where the technology is going to go, not always react to it. We have example after example. In the United States, stem cell research for a short time was banned. And then this was under the Bush administration. And then they realized, well, if we ban it in the United States, South Korea is going to do research on stem cells. And then the United States is going to be left behind. So they quickly lifted the ban on stem cell research so that we could do it. Reacting to the technological capacities. So I would say there is no, well, you do see examples. In Switzerland, for example, they've created what they call a crypto valley. So government of Switzerland has said, we want to position ourselves as being the right regulatory framework for all things blockchain and cryptocurrency. So that's a good example of a country that anticipated that. Estonia, of course, is a good example of digital governance. They're anticipating where governance is going to go, and they've set up the right regulatory framework for people to be able to thrive in a digital government way. Switzerland has done that for cryptocurrency and blockchain. And I would say this is a low-hanging fruit opportunity for legislatures and leaders in Tanzanian government, is to anticipate where these are going to go. One, identify, I'm sorry, I'm going to segue a little bit here, but identify where Tanzania wants to thrive. You can't do it all. Where does Tanzania want to thrive? Pick those few things, create the right regulatory environment, and then you will see investment capital and knowledge flow here to do that. You see that happening in Rwanda right now with drones. So Rwanda's said, hey, we're a drone country. And what do you see happening is all these drone companies moving to Rwanda because they can thrive. And Malawi's doing a similar thing. Tanzania, what's the agenda? That requires a lot of work and thinking through. I know in Kenya they've launched their Big Four, but I would say this is an opportunity for Tanzanian legislatures and leaders to identify where they want to thrive in the future, narrow that down, not try to do everything, and create the right regulatory environment in anticipation where things are going to go.
Thank you. This question, Ambassador Ami, I would love for you to respond to this, being that you have experience balancing the fear and opportunity that's brought on by Fourth Industrial Revolution. the fear and opportunities brought in by the fourth industrial revolution?
Right. No, first I wanted to add on to what Nicholas responded to the question about a regulatory framework and all these things. And indeed, this is where this community that has been brought together by Sahara Sparks should work extra hard, because as I keep on repeating, you guys are aware of what is happening, but the policy deficit is huge. Regulatory deficit is huge. Even in terms of what Nicolas said, in attracting investments or interest in Tanzania by international players, it's not there because there's lack of clarity. And from my previous work experience, when I was ambassador, I had the role of mobilizing investments into Tanzania. But I can admit, we only know how to deal with resource-inspired FDIs. But we have not even taken advantage of market-inspired FDIs, in spite of being, if you talk about this common market, we are the common market. We share borders with everybody. But when it comes to the third type of FDI, which is inspired by IP, intellectual property, we're not even discussing about that. I was expressing my frustration with a lady there who was from the media. We've been having this discussion for the last, today is the third day. Nothing is reported in the media. And this is a major thing happening. So you have a task as a community, Sahara Sparks, to build this awareness. And so we start conversation about these issues. We cannot be that arrogant that this group here would come up with a solution for Tanzania. We can't. But the nation has to be mobilized, and I think in your conclusions you have to find best ways of communicating. And having this issue of digital economy, fourth industrial revolution, has to be discussed in Tanzania. It's not being discussed at all. So, and this is the only way to deal with the fear. There's no fear at all. And I think Nicholas inferred in his presentation, if you want to plot the future by like driving a car depending on your rear view mirror, you
definitely not.
So you have to learn from the future, and that's the best way to deal with the fears. That's the best way to deal with
No, it's okay. Dr. Mshinda, you wanted to talk about drones, but I would love for you to connect that with the issue that has been brought up about job security.
Yes. On the job security side, I think this is the question which we have to look at the context. Because if you read the report of the Ndulu's Commission's report on jobs, the pathway for prosperity, you see the fear of jobs is more apparent in developed countries like US and Europe, where they are missing jobs and they are thinking the problem is actually the migration, but as a matter of fact, it's the technologies which have been put, which they are now being used. But for countries like, and there is some estimates looking at the cost of using the robots and the personnel cost. For example, in Kenya, they have two case studies in Kenya and Ethiopia, and you see that it's going to take some time for Africa, for robots really to come in. The most recent studies in South Africa, where there are some losses of jobs there will be losses of jobs, but there is also a net gain of 1.2 million jobs if South Africa is moving into AI. In that particular report, there is a comparison between Tanzania and Indonesia in terms of using this technology on the robot side. And there are opportunities in Tanzania. So people who are working in Tanzania at the moment, they actually don't have to worry about it. It's only later on, so it's the question of trying to see how we will be engaged. The sad story for Tanzania, the opportunity which have lost Tanzania is actually on the drone. And Honorati Masanja, I'm sure he's in the room. Masanja? Yes. Again, it's the Fakara story. There is a guy called Zakaria. And Zakaria is the guy who had already developed almost half of the system of using drone to deliver medicine and blood transfusion. And that was the time, even before Zipline working in Rwanda. And it's also good to know, Nicholas, that Zanzibar is the largest area which have surveyed by drone than any other area in the world. So we thought that when I was at COSTECH, I thought that that's what we were pushing. But then and Zakaria was actually working with Zipline to develop a drone system in Rwanda. Edward with the World Bank, they were also arranging for drone competition like Victoria Challenge in Mwanza. So we thought that was one way of advertising our country as a drone destination. But unfortunately, because of lack of understanding, or we didn't communicate well with the authority, that opportunity has moved into Rwanda, and Zakaria is completely frustrated. So this is a very good lesson to know, because nobody will expect Zakaria will come up with that solution. And this is technology. These technologies, as I mentioned, the entry barrier is actually very, very low. Thank you.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. I would have loved to continue this conversation. You guys can have time with them, ask as many questions as you want, and I wish you guys a lovely time. Thank you so much.